Hey, welcome back, toy fans, to the Masters of the Universe Classic Director's Commentary. With me, your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. I was the brand manager for about 90% of Masters of the Universe Classics, pretty much everything until it went over to Super 7. And today, if you couldn't tell from this opening shot, we are talking to Mr. Yellow Pants himself, Cyclone. One of the, middle figures in the vintage line, kind of coming out pretty much smack dab in the middle of the original run between 82 and 86-ish. And he became really a core figure of the good guys, appearing in the 2000X line, the vintage line, and of course classics. He was a character with, oddly defined wind powers, whether he spun in a circle with his arms out like the actual toy worked, or in Filmation, when he just kind of whipped his arms around in circles and created, sort of circular vortexes of wind energy-ish stuff. Or even in some of the art, where he was a bit more like, Red Tornado from DC Universe, where his body would become a tornado or cyclone on the bottom half and propel him through the air. So, however his powers worked, however they were defined, he had the wind powers. He was the guy who spun around and shot wind at you and oh wow, that sounded bad. Shot wind at you. Well, blasted you with air. Boy, I'm not getting out of this one, am I? All right, let's just say he had wind powers and he spun around in circles and he appeared in Filmation, which was awesome. He really does stand out in the animation with his blue and yellow. Not many characters really have this kind of color scheme, and I think the combination of the blue and yellow, and even with the red highlights, especially having the circles around the wrists and the outer space belt with the Saturn symbol on it, or planet with a ring, if you will. I guess that could also be Neptune or Uranus. Even, does Jupiter have rings? I can't remember. Maybe I think they found rings on Jupiter. Anyway, that's not the point. But he did always have rings. Even his original concept, where the color scheme was a little bit different, he was still kind of covered in rings and had the spacey theme with the hologram sticker on his chest, and he was a little bit more robotic-like in his original version that Roger Sweet created. But he evolved and became the figure that we all love today. And the whole idea of classics, like with all the figures we released in that line, was to kind of do a, I guess you could say, definitive version of him, but at least one that, really incorporated all the elements you loved about the vintage figure. And we tried to incorporate other elements too, things like the giant circle from 2000X, which I know a lot of people are like, what is this thing? Because if you didn't know the 2000X line and you just knew Cyclone from the vintage days, he didn't have that. And we even got people wondering what the heck you were supposed to do with it. Is it a hula hoop? Does it go around his waist? Is it supposed to be simulating his wind powers? More or less, it's exactly what 2000X was. It was adding extra details to the armor. He got kind of more of a samurai helmet, and there were sort of samurai details added to the rings that went across his forehead and on his wrists and legs. And he had that giant red loopy thing attached to his back, which you can see from the show. It was meant to attach to his back pointing upright, not around his waist. It was just part of his armor. What it did was really never established. One thing about his 2000X appearance is they did change his race and had him Asian, if you will, even though he's got blue skin. And this is very common nowadays in sci-fi and fantasy, where characters will be given a different race or ethnicity in order to have the characters be more inclusive. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's done a lot, and Cyclone is an example of that. And in 2000X, the idea was, even though he had blue skin and was a Gar, he was also going to be an Asian character, because MOTU at that point didn't have an Asian character. I guess Jitsu wasn't yet introduced. And not all Gar, though, are indicated as being Asian. In fact, it's really just their skin color that makes them Gar. So maybe, there are Gar of different, sort of sub-races of Gar. Some are Asian, some are more Caucasian, some are more, African, or Eternian, but black. All right, black, African-American, Eternian, it never works. Keldor is Gar, and that's actually really important because he and Cyclone are the only two Gar figures that have been released. And a lot of people don't realize that they are the same race. They are both from the blue-skinned race. And there was a lot of issues with them and where they came from. You can see on the maps that we did, on the map of Eternia, the present time for He-Man, you can see Anwat Gar, the islands where Cyclone lives and is found in the show. In the pre-Eternia map, and this is the early sketch of it before color was added, Anwat Gar was a full island. So, complete with spaceports and like sort of landing strips in the shape of Cyclone's back kind of armory thing. And you can see more about sort of the mystery of the Gar on the Mystery of the Maps video I made early in this this channel. It's an interesting video. All right, so besides being from the Gar Island, a big thing about Cyclone obviously is his chest symbol there, the hologram that shows different planets, and we made sure we actually did do a hologram like the vintage figure had. In fact, when we were looking at the hologram and doing the sticker, we deliberately wanted to make sure that there was actually the way it was done in the vintage line worked as far as the layout of the planet systems. So when we were designing another one of the maps, specifically the Horde Empire map, which showed the whole universe, we very much looked at Cyclone's chest emblem as being a map of where he was at the moment, which was on Eternia. So we kind of replicated that on the map. All right, so continuing along the path of Cyclone's development as a figure, as noted in 2000X, he was revamped with more samurai-esque armor and kind of an Asian-looking, well, he had an Asian face, again, even though he had blue skin. And then he was also re-released in the 2000X in a different deco that had bright red arms and a dark blue chest. To me, Cyclone is very emblematic of his colors. His bright yellow and blue armor look made him stand out in my toy chest when I was a kid. I didn't have any other figure that had that combination of colors. Now, the 2000X line was notorious for kind of doing odd color choices. These weren't aimed at collectors, these were aimed at kids, trying to use bright colors to get kids to rebuy figures, or maybe to buy Skeletor for the first time because you preferred him like this. This is the infamous Disco Skeletor, as collectors call him. You can see the whole video I did about that. But really it was just that 2000X was doing creative colors for the kiddies, hoping it would help sell them off shelf. It is funny, though, how some of the figures, like Disco Skeletor, has actually become kind of part of pop culture himself and has been done as a figure by other companies in this deco. In fact, I think even Mattel did him in a mini. And no, we didn't really look at doing Cyclone in these 2000X colors in the Classics line. It just, I don't know, it felt sacrilegious to not do him in his yellow and blue. It's what he was all about. He doesn't really change color. But I'll tell you one thing he does do. When I was a kid, there were two toys that really hurt my hand. One was pounding on the buttons on my 8-bit NES system, which finally I got the Max controller and took that away. But then there was Cyclone. So his action feature worked by spinning a wheel on his waist. And you'd have to sort of spin it with your thumb, hitting it, and the grooves would slide and make his arms spin around. This same action feature was done in the 2000X line, again with a gear, or the spinning knob, spinning wheel, I guess, yeah, wheel in his waist. Boy, did that kill my finger. But I loved that we included this detail. This was something we spoke to the Horseman about very specifically and said, when you sculpt him, even though the wheel isn't going to be there as an action feature, put it as part of his belt, because that's just what Classics is all about. And I remember very specifically talking to the Horseman about that one, and they really laughed and thought it was an awesome idea. And that was really part of how we all came together, was including those kind of little details made Cyclone so cool as a Classics figure. I mean, not just because his colors really popped, but, he had the little thing on his belt. And he had a bio, again, establishing himself as part of the Gar race and his involvement in the Great Wars and all of that. And while fans, wanted a 2000X looking Cyclone, with more of the armor and kind of the loops done a little bit bigger, etc., we really had to steer away from this because a lot of the executives who worked on the 2000X line were still around and were kind of bitter by its pale performance. We did eventually get to do a pack of heads, so you could do the figures like in that last slide, and we did include Cyclone as one of these. This head was sculpted at the time of the pack, unlike Buzz-Off and Grizzlor, which we had around for years. So we had a brand new head sculpted by the Four Horsemen in the 2000X style. Still kind of using the same head, though. They didn't really go for that Asian look that the animated series went for. It was more in the armor as opposed to in the bone structure of the face, if you will. It was pretty much the same face, just with a different helmet. And, whichever head you use, he turned out amazing. And he got a new chest, too. He got a chest with that big circle thing. That was a fully tooled chest, which we got to use, of course, on Strobo later on, which was awesome, having that in our tooling bank. And, maybe we could have even done a Filmation version with the green chest, but, never got to that. Pop did it. That's how they did their Funko, Pop. But, hey, there's always the future. You never know. Maybe a Filmation-looking Cyclone is just a wish list away. But I'm glad we got to him. He was a favorite as a kid, and even though he literally destroyed my thumb, I loved him. I loved spinning him around and knocking figures down with his arms. They were great. He had a great action feature and a great look. That was Cyclone.